In what
ways
did the black race need healing? One of the areas that the black race need healing most is in the central nerve system. But we got a job to do in healing the black race now. That comes in a different category. Those leaders cannot help me, and that's why I'm vulnerable.
In what ways is the black race in need of healing?
In what
ways
did the black race need healing? One of the areas that the black race need healing most is in the central nerve system.
I'm on Johnny getting a break because my blood pressure is real high. I keep telling y'all, leave me alone.
The Green Man Challenge is all about generational health. We trying to make 10K of a day a bare minimum, you heard? 10K a day of vitamin A, the bare minimum. What? In fact, as the divine soil, we trying to turn you into a plant. We want the various chlorophylls to be in your blood 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We want you to feel the benefit of what it feels like to build a circulating pool of pigments. A circulating pool of pigments. Now, you've never, ever felt your body with a full bloodstream of pigments 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is a brand new level of health to reach, brand new level of mental health and cognitive ability. Pass these seeds on. The Green Man. Yeah. And then there's that. We're going to make sure that your insides are clean.
Supply and demand. Demand is the desire consumers have for a good or service. The more people who want a good or service, the higher the demand for it. Supply is the total amount of a good or service available for consumption. Supply and demand have a big impact on the prices of product.
Time is money. You are what you buy. What are you spending your time on?
Period. You just got to have the nutrients. So are you going to pay $1,000 to have this nutrient profile circulating in your blood, or are you going to pay $65?
I'm on Johnny getting a break because my blood pressure is real high. I keep telling y'all, leave me alone.
Melanin, pheomelanin. Neurons produce neuromelanin. Usually in neurons, you have some degree of eumelanin, which is melanin pretty much devoid of the impurities of sulfur in its production equation. So when you walking through the production equation of how pheomelanin is formed and how eumelanin is formed, the difference begins right at the addition of sulfur. So once you have glutathione or cysteine enter the matrix where melanin's formation is happening, that's where you get your pheomelanins. Then in the pocket of your eumelanins, which are your browns, your dark browns, and then, you know, the black to blue black to purple black, as people would describe complexions. you have a different concentration of carboxylic acid, right? So that becomes the differentiating factor in those two, in those categories, right? But all of these, the more nuanced you get with it, the more you differentiate the systems associated with the skin, not just the skin, but the different levels of skin, the different systems that interact with the skin, the differences of those systems because of people's different haplotypes, phenotypes, genotypes, right? S&Ps, because you can even add little enzyme differences and the way different mutations and things like that would be inherent in maybe certain pockets of the population, but not others. We go back to this article where it not only highlights the difference in, so hopefully in all of that conversation, you got the impact, right? Because I know I can be all over the place, but at least you got the impact, hopefully, of just the difference between ethnicities and vitamin C. With like how important or how large of an impact just that one difference in processing nutrition can be, right? Just the one difference of vitamin C being the required nutrient to kickstart tissue building, right? So outside of thinking about the nutrients you need, the lysine, the this, the that, you need the vitamin C to initiate collagen synthesis, right? You need the vitamin C for that. The depth and the types of cells that build these tissues at some level had to dictate the material required. This is just a common sense fact, or at least it was for me early on with pulling together the research, right? Right? So the other part, though, is after adjusting for age, body mass index, gender, educational level, use of vitamin supplement. Hold on. We in this book right here. EnQi is the pulse of the culture, right? The Skintology series, right? We still in the Skintology series, just in case you didn't. We in the Pulse of the Culture book. We on page 150. After for adjusting for age, body mass index, gender, educational level, use of vitamin supplements, alcohol intake, leisure time, physical activity, menopausal status, and total cholesterol, we observed that beta carotene was significantly associated with insulin resistance and fasting insulin in a race-dependent manner. Okay? Among African Americans, lower beta carotene levels were associated with higher estimates of insulin resistance and fasting insulin, whereas these same associations were not significant for whites. There's only one major difference, that pigment density or activity, or some combination of the two, right? And that's been one of the things that we've been discussing since the early articles and conversations and videos we did on the subject, right? If we're looking at nuanced differences, and it started with the conversation of type 2 diabetes, why is it so attached to being black or brown? Whereas it seems like the darker you are, the higher your risk factor for type 2 diabetes. You know, nowadays it's almost considered a certainty that if you're Black in America, you're going to die from diabetic complication, you know, heart disease, cancer, brain disease, etc. But something that's either caused or exacerbated by blood glycation, right? Something in that pocket. And all of those things fit that description, right? So that's where we at in terms of zooming out and zooming back in. We're going to zoom out from vitamin C, zoom right back into vitamin A. So now vitamin A, we have discussed, is responsible for the function of alpha and beta cells in the pancreas, right? It's very important to stellate cells in the pancreas, in the liver, the heart, a wide variety of places besides just the vitamin A is good for your eyes. Like that, I think that is constant. That's a common thing that everybody knows. But I don't think that everybody understands that vitamin A is crucial, like life or death crucial for your heart, your liver, or your pancreas. Right. So those needs is going to supersede needs of other things. So if you don't have enough vitamin A in your diet every day and the right type of vitamin A, then you're not going to get the vitamin A benefit for the skin, because that's not going to be as high priority as the vitamin A required to keep your heartbeat running the way it's supposed to be going. Like that's going to get the first vitamin A that come into the body. Whoop. Right? Now you're going to need certain level of vitamin A for what? Because your body got to make 50 billion cells every day. Every day your body makes about 50 billion cells, right? Every one of them, because vitamin A is one of the fat soluble vitamins needed for cell membrane. Every cell needed. Right? That process is so important that that's going to supersede, you know, old cells. In fact, old cells is a source that your body uses to recycle that stuff, because, you know, your body can recycle some nutrients from older cells that are carrying, different than creating nutrients from scratch. You know what I'm saying? Because vitamin A is stored in fat cells. And the storage level of vitamin A in particular types of fat cells dictates tissue behavior. You know, so that would change the difference between an organ healing and an organ not healing in any situation, from an infection to a, you know, break, or, you know, a bruise or an impact injury, you know, bacteria, virus, whatever, the response, the recovery from said response to trauma, whatever, all of those things are going to be predicated on these little nuanced differences. So that's why when you accumulate the differences into large things that we identify populations as, there's no way a single model for health or even a single dietary maxim across the board at all times. Like, we're keto, we're only eating fat, like, or we're just eating an all protein. Like, once you add the changing world into the technological synthetic world that we've created for ourselves, we add a lot more challenges onto our body's chemistry than we solve. Meaning we cause more problems than we fix, right? Because we have the surface level requirements of comfort, So we created heating systems and cooling systems. So we have AC in the summertime, heat in the winter. Well, having external AC and heat, right, lowers the need for use on our thermodynamic system of heat regulation and how metabolism rate needs to stay coupled to respiration rate. You see what I'm saying? So this is where you get the old school classic calories in, calories out concept, right? It's basically how much calories you're consuming versus how many you burning. That's going to be a matter of metabolism and respiration. That's going to be a matter of activity. So what things are converted and calculated into these, it gives you just more data points that you can use. And this is how things change over time, scientifically, or stay the same. Vitamin A is even deeper than, blindness or losing your eyesight. This is now going beyond makeup, right? And the superficial demand for makeup because of vitamin A's impact in the skin, or at least when externally applied to the skin. Now you can get to the focus of, we having this problem with brain disease and heart disease, also driven by vitamin A. So now maybe if we're looking at the differences in the numbers between diabetics and some of the diseases that we know diabetes is partially or even fully responsible for creating, if we go back to the basics and we tie vitamin A metabolism to some portion of that, and we say now Black people and white people metabolize vitamin A differently, right? There's more nuanced conversations that come. And so this is where I'm just explaining to you what it is that we're trying to walk down, and a lot of what we're addressing in the books, and how to deal with these and put together the foods and the plan and all of those things are in the books, because you start to have more nuanced conversation, right? You start to develop, the more you understand, the more you learn, the more you're learning how much you don't know. So it's going to create more curiosity, more questions, more nuanced research, right? So then you're going to start to get into, okay, well, if there's a difference between the metabolism of vitamin A in Black people and the metabolism of vitamin A in white people, is it because, now this we highlight, and this, we cause a lot of commotion and controversy with this book when we start talking about the differences in mitochondria function in Black people versus white people. And we know mitochondria is the target of metabolism, right? So now if we identify there's differences in vitamin A metabolism, we already identified in another book, right? We already identified in another book that there's differences in mitochondria function between Black and white folks. When you're looking at the vitamin A differences, you got to ask yourself, is it because the pigment intrinsically, or is it because there are dietary differences, right? Because typically the average Black person does eat more vegetables than the average white person, even though the number is still way beneath what the average person in general should be eating. I'm trying to understand this. Everybody is eating way less vegetables than they're supposed to be. But in that metric, Black people are eating a little bit more vegetables overall than white folks But like I said, there are more nuanced areas of study because then you got to ask, is it because of dietary measures? Is it because of if one population is eating more vegetables than the other, that means there's a different amount of proform vitamin A versus preform vitamin A being consumed, right? Proform being vegetables, preformed being from animal flesh, right? So if somebody's dealing with a mostly protein or all meat kind of diet, their vitamin A is almost 100% exclusively from preformed vitamin A, right? If you have a vegan or plant-based diet, that diet is going to be almost exclusively proformed vitamin A, right? So there could be differences that could be masked as white versus black when it could be because this group might have a more meat-based diet than this group is more this. So there's other things that can come up as questions in trying to figure out this overall problem of A, not enough vitamin A for black folks, but then B, the correlation of low vitamin A status with higher insulin resistance. And then, also you got to add the connecting things from that, which would be the obesity, right? Fat. Niggas is fat, right? Statistic wise, this is what the stats are saying, right? Fat, right? Which the theories are saying fat means lazy, right? Calories in, calories out, right? If we don't take any hormones or genetics into consideration, right? You can make those other assumptions though. Yeah, fat means lazy because the person's not exercising and they're eating, ice cream 3 times a day. So they're eating ice cream and cake 3 times a day and they're not exercising, when they should be exercising, they're having bonbons, right? We don't take in genetic, mental, we don't take historical data into, it's just the now pretty much being calculated in that concept. It's just the now. Like, what's the exercise look like? What does the diet look like? Period. We need to figure out what you're burning versus what you're consuming and how to get you to burn more and consume less. And for most people, that works, which is another compounding problem with understanding that in some cases it's different. It's more to it, right? Because once you start to get, especially with applied science, once you start to get success with a method, you start to think that that method is infallible or it's always going to be all wise, right, and exact, or you shouldn't even push to develop better methodology or, tools to give you, more depth, more insight, more data points to correlate, to get to different conclusions and perspectives, like to open up the conversation. You know what I'm saying? So now at the perspective we at with the vitamin A understanding, now we can compact these things together, right? And understand, okay, A, there's a metabolism difference that goes beyond food choices and, meat versus kale salad, pork chops versus kale salad, beef versus hemp. Like it goes beyond those things to genetics, enzyme sets, haplogroups. Like those are the things that are more impactful in this conversation in determining, vitamin A metabolism. Now, from there, once you understand that, this circles us right back around to the original subject with the aura and the skin and the pigment, because once you say to yourself, okay, the pigments that require the most vitamin A from the eyes are also in the skin, the darker the skin, the higher, hypothetically, this requirement for vitamin A has to become. If the darkness in the skin is dependent on these opsins, which means that the darker your skin is, the more opsins or absent activity you have, that has to be fueled or substantiated by vitamin A, then it stands to reason that you would need a higher amount of vitamin A. And if you're consuming the same amount as other people, vitamin A deficient symptoms will creep up, and they may not be directly viewed as the fact that your dark skin is creating a handicap for you, because you don't know that you need you some extra greens. You need you some extra, carrots or sweet potatoes, or, you need you some extra pigment in your food. You need you some extra pigment in your food. Now, I've been saying it for 20 years. Modern science, the scientific journals, Western academia, they catching up now. And this is one of the things that made what I've been doing unique from everybody else. The idea that we actually need to eat the pigment. We need to eat the pigment. A lot of people ask about Ali Muhammad. Well, this is one of the things that was a fundamental difference back in the days when we went on the tour and did the fear of black genetics and all this kind of stuff. That was one of the fundamental differences that we had. In his ideology, he was telling people that we needed to avoid pigment in the food because of the anti-nutrients. Phytic acid being one, just like lectins in general, stuff like that, that's associated with pigment in the fruits and vegetables. His idea was to remove the pigment from the fruits and vegetables. And I'm like, no, you can't do that, because that's the source of all the nutrients. And if you don't know that, like, God bless the child that has his own. Like, if you don't know that, you know what I'm saying? So that's one of the things that created the fundamental difference in our thinking and approach to the science of health and the body and food and blah, 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 blah. Even back then, without getting into the context of the drama from off the stage or backstage or behind the scenes, just in the philosophy part between me and Ali, that's one of the things that drove a wedge, is that fundamental idea right there. And even a lot of, it created a lot of confusion, because even Ali was always anti-Dr. Sebi. Whereas my critiques of Dr. Sebi were rooted more in advancing the culture than besmirching the legacy, right? Whereas Ali's was more driven by besmirching the legacy than actually extending, furthering the knowledge and the understanding and the wisdom and furthering the culture surrounding the research and keeping the research going at the same speed. Because that's what we look at, prophets or just people that came along, gurus that, people that changed the game in one shape, form, or fashion, is the level of information that was revealed to us under their influence, in their time, well, at their prime, so to speak, what they showed us to, how they inspired us, how they enlightened us, so when the emphasis gets changed, even to the controversy surrounding me in the greater context of the YouTube community right now, even that was based on me saying we need to get back to more of an information-driven orientation. That's all that. That's the key core to what I was saying out there, even though I'm gonna leave it out there for now, but just to make the same inference where you can see one thing reflecting the other. now that we understand, okay, so this is what this means, this is what this means. If P, then Q, right? If you don't have the book, if P, then Q, you're killing yourself. You have to go get the book, if P, then Q, right? But if P, then Q, right? The greater demand of vitamin A is also going to put all of the systems that depend on vitamin A in a higher risk category. So now we see where if fibrosis in the heart is related to vitamin A storages, and we don't know we need a higher amount of vitamin A, right? Because we haven't went to Amazon and did something as simple as adding these 2 books to the cart, right? Adding these 2 books to the cart and then going to the checkout. Go add those 2 books to the cart, then go to the checkout, right? Add those 2 books to the cart and then go to the checkout, right? Because we haven't done those things, right? We don't have that. We're missing the information and the keys to put these things together and go, okay. So if the heart cells are dependent vitamin A, but we're not getting enough vitamin A, typically we should have a higher rate of malfunction in the heart because we're functioning below the right level with the vitamin. The rate of heart disease amongst Black people. Check. Heart rate disease issues apparent. Check. So you go, okay. All right. Well, let's check the liver since the liver is, and you go, okay. Liver issues. Black and brown people. Check. Then you double back and you look at the Latinos. You go, ooh, yeah, it's even more crazy over there, especially with the Mexicans and the, you go, oh man, so the Spanish, okay, yeah, so that's okay, check liver problems. Then you look again and you go, okay, well, let's see if there's any pancreas problem. Diabetes, check. And so you go, oh, wait a minute. So this little one vitamin can not only have a big impact on my aura, right? But my health in general, more specifically, in ways that I never knew is important, because what's important is being dictated to me by commercial interests, and commercial interests like to keep me aware of a thing, but not informed about a thing. Aware, but not informed. Aware, but not informed. Right? Oh, 50, the movement, being seen on the platform. Peace to the chat. Let's run it up one time for 050.
The world knew New York as Muslims, as gods. When I was growing up, we had knowledge of self. I was a god body. I'm still acknowledging myself as that.
Back to the
Let's go back to being civilized.
So this is what I'm saying, though, with, you know, making the connection between all of these smaller things and the larger things, that when you constantly hearing about the term vitamin A over time, you get dulled down to it. Just like hearing the same thing of anything over and over and over and over again, you get dulled down to it, you know, till you start to get numb to the concept, and then it's almost unimportant. And then my problem is when I hear people complain about things and they don't understand the thing they're ignoring is the thing that's creating the issue they might be complaining about. Right now, you hear a lot of people saying, but what are we going to do about the school system? What are we going to do about the school system? And then I say, we got to address this exercise. We got to address, these diets, these vegetables. And then somebody else will come along and ridicule what I'm saying about we need to get back to the study and we need to get back to the teaching. We need to get back to the diet, right? The understanding of the diet. The understanding of the diet was never designed to be lost in scientific jargon. That's one of the things that's a foundational piece of what we do at Melanin versus Diabetes is we try to make the complex science back into plain language so that the common person can understand the relationship between saying, well, what we going to do with the kids in school having low scores versus, somebody over here on the far, right-hand side saying we need to work on this diet and the majority of people not being able to make the connection. A lot of what affects the grade level is broken down into two things. On the one side, is broken down into brain development. How well developed is the brain and the nervous system? And then also not just how developed the brain is and the nerves are, but how well the eyes work, right? Because if a child's having trouble seeing, they're going to have trouble processing the information. And once they get behind the other kids and they constantly get into a groove where they feel like the class is going past them, they develop a negative attitude towards the learning environment because technically they taking L's every day. You know what I'm saying? So they don't feel good about the process, right? So not being able to see good affects that. The ability, the speed at which they process information, which is based on largely, how well developed the brain is and the neural networks and things like that, which has a thing to do with early experiences, habits, and nutrition. And then the flip side to it all is the habits in a large, more pronounced sense, right? So the one side, you got brain development, eye development, eye health, things like that. Then, cognizant ability based on that. But then on the other side, you have the things that's more directly dependent on, what you eat and how much you exercise. Like that's across the board. Exercise has been demonstrated to improve school performance, IQs, all of those things by improving the instruments that we use just at a rough level. Like you got to know that because 90% of the information we process comes through our eyes, the better our eyes function, the better we're able to process information. If P, then Q. Right? Because 90% of the information we process comes through our eyes. The better our eyes work, the better we process information. So if P, then Q. If our eyes working better allows us to think better. If vitamin A increases our eyes working better, then vitamin A also indirectly increases our ability to think and process information. Oh yeah, what are we going to do about these kids' grades? Well, your child's eating Chinese food, Subways, chips, Lunchables, right? All these type of items devoid of the specific things that make, right? a lot of high sodium foods, right? High sodium foods are going to be low potassium. Going to be low potassium. Low potassium means, the part of your brain that access memories and things like that and correlate that into your lingo and convo and response and wit and humor and ability to, to do the thing, the being alive thing, that whole integration between live intake and live information and processing to memory and memory storage and predictions and integration of all that information into your now experience. Like potassium is responsible for a lot of that. So a diet high in sodium, which is low in potassium, is going to affect that. It's also going to affect your balance in terms of water, your hydration level. Hydration level is going to influence the sugar level. And what do we know? Oh man, the children are eating too much sugar, so they not behaving right, or their grades is wild, or this or that or the other. Well, how is that happening? Because it has everything to do with the glycation and the water and hydration, and which ultimately winds up affecting directly the pigment systems of the body, which diabetes, brain disease, in children, poor behavior, poor school, blah, blah, blah. Right? So all of those things would be related to be able to say, what are we going to do about the school? Shifting the responsibility from us being the parents and the primary caretakers to what the school system is going to do for us, that's victim behavior. We got to take the education of our babies like, yeah, the school's, responsible to us in some form, shape, fashion, etc. But you're the primary educator, right? You're supposed to make sure they learn the things that you think they need to learn. The school curriculum is in the real world, the school curriculum is a bare minimum. This is the minimum of things they need to be exposed to be competitive with the rest of the world, education-wise, to be able to communicate, assimilate, blend in, be normal. Here's the normal level of information processing, things to be aware of, quote unquote, history. Here's the bare minimum, learn this. But in order to exceed, you need more information about whatever your particular sector of the world is going to be. So if the bare minimum becomes a bar that's too high for you to reach, you're not going to be able to move around, like, especially the more the world shapes up and information becomes more tied to time than money. See, there's a point in our time where information was hated. That's information was hated, because when you thought about getting more information, you thought about reading more study, more labor, more work, intense, so that was more associated with new information. So the idea of accumulating or study, like that was like, now the idea is changing, especially as science starts to link longevity, neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, things like that, even nerve recovery with how much we're learning, studying, our ability to learn new concepts, process information, like all of those things, as those become more relevant in the day-to-day conversation, our idea of what is interesting also expands at the same time. The more we learn more, the more we become interested in. The dumber we are, the more smaller our sphere of interest is, just to try to make it more plain. So as a person's intelligence increases, they become more interested in more things. even though those things are still nuanced, because if a person is their world primarily revolves around music. Well, when they get the historic itch to dig and research and scratch, they'll be doing that within the confines of music. So they'll be learning history of music and Pythagoras and, music theory and all this other kind of nuanced information within that universe. You know what I'm saying? Where somebody else might be getting into sports history or the history of whatever. It's the same in the health space. It's just the problem is when you go back far enough into the history, the language changes so much it doesn't reflect what the common nomenclature is, so we disregard it all the way, and then we have problems like what we're running into now that science is helping to clear up. But it's even hard for science. It's hard for the things that people trust as proof and evidence to work when the belief system it needs to shatter is so contradictory to what the new information is saying. So if the new information is saying vitamin A responsible for heart health and liver health and metabolism and fats and obesity and all of these other things, because it's so far removed from the idea of vitamin A being something for the eyes and even pigment in the eyes being different than pigment in the skin, like all of those different things, all of those have to now change at once. And we don't know how much further the changes have to go because, again, they just discovered 3,000 different types of neurons in the brain, which means that we don't understand what the full context that means in terms of brain nutrition. Are all these different neurons requiring different varieties of vitamins and minerals and, but it's a guarantee that'll uniquely affect us all in individual ways. You see what I'm saying? So when we get into this, to go back to the book, page 150, EnQi is the pulse of the culture. When you talk about pulse of the culture, you're talking about the main thing, right? Because the culture has so many different strands. To be the pulse of the culture, you have to be that one thing in between multiple aspects of the culture that unifies, right? The heartbeat of a thing. The heartbeat unifies all of the different rhythms of every different aspect of the body into one sound, one language, one communication, right? So the pulse of the culture is, yes, the surface level meaning, right? But to take it a step further, we're talking about beans, which pulse is the scientific term actually for the family of, beans and seeds and nuts and all of those kind of things. It's called pulses, right? So the pulse of the culture is also speaking towards the future choice for beans as the primary or best quality, most complete protein source for human health. Right? That's the pulse of the culture, the pulse of the food culture, which ironically, going by today's value system, is beautifully underpriced, right? Because beans are the least expensive thing that you can get from the supermarket. And so when you add in the nutrition, pound for pound, dollar for dollar, those of us that have to ball on a budget to understand the nutrients, the nutrient density in a low price food item that could stretch for the the pulse of the culture, right? And then also feeling like I've been picked on, I've been abused, I've been targeted, I've been blackballed. All of the things that beings have been throughout the history of the evolving dietary philosophy wars, right? Because people have had the debates of animal protein versus plant protein, right? But in those conversations, beans are kind of frowned upon. Keto versus plant-based, or Dr. Sebi's concept of alkaline diet and beans being acid, right? But chickpeas are acceptable, or just complications like that, where Dr. Sebi says no hybrids, right? But then he also says that spelt is good for bread and flour and grains. Sorry, that, Dr. Sebi says no hybrids, but then he says spelt is good, right? And if you do a little bit more homework, which I did, unfortunately for me, my dumb ass, I always got to know more, right? That's a curse in some instances, because once I found out spelt was a hybrid, and I started telling folks like, hold up, I know Dr. Sebi said no hybrids, but he also recommended spelt. So who wants to wrestle with that?
Oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. Good. Good thing I have my grocery shopping list. Don't leave home without it.